Another edition of Beat the Closing Number, MLB edition of Beat the Closing Number, presented by thelines.com and Bet365 Sportsbook. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined by Nuwwarah, fellow lead writer over at thelines.com, breaking down the AL Wildcard Series and World Series futures as the National League postseason setup yet to be decided, with Mets and Braves going on as we record this. And Mo, it's been a swing of emotions for you. We even had to do a little bit of a retake for the beginning of this podcast, because first the Braves blew a 3-0 lead, and then the Mets in the bottom of the 8th inning just blew a 6-3 lead.
Who wants it less in the NL East today? This has been quite a. I guess you would say this is the Metsiest way for this to go, honestly.
Right, watching the top of the 8th inning, it seemed like it was anti-Mets for New York to come back, and then Ozzie Albies clears the bases, down 6-4. Braves, as we record, up a run, seemingly en route to winning game one. And now the Mets have washed their bullpen, or at least the back end of their bullpen, going into game number 2. So it really is a crazy setup. And now you, like you said originally when we first started recording, it's a win-win for you, and it still kind of is positioned that way.
Yeah, I mean, I will say if the Braves get through, they are going to, a little bit of a spoiler for our futures preview, but just looking at this way this bracket shakes out, they couldn't have drawn a tougher path. Let's say that. So it will be quite an adventure sweating this Braves team in the postseason, assuming they hang on here.
So we'll get into the World Series futures market, as Mo alluded to, in a little bit, but AL Wildcard Series, Astros against the Tigers, the 3 versus the 6 seed, with Detroit sneaking their way in down the stretch, 31-13 over their final 44 regular season games. And then you have the Orioles and Royals in the 4-5 matchup. And if we look at the MLB postseason bracket, the winner of Houston-Detroit will take on Cleveland, arguably the luckiest team in baseball. And then Baltimore and Kansas City, the winner of that AL Wildcard Series, facing the number 1 seed New York Yankees. Starting off with Astros and Tigers, Mo, where do you want to begin there, whether it's series odds or game 1 odds?
Let's start with game 1. Super matchup, obviously, of pitchers here. I'm actually a little bit tempted to bet the under. It's like 6.5, but man, these are just two absolute premium arms. I mean, you got Skubal, who should literally win Cy Young unanimous there. And then you have Valdez, who had a bit of a rocky stretch to start the year. I always believed in Framber. The Discord hated Framber, man. And I never stopped believing in Framber. He cleaned it up back half of the year and has been just awesome. Started throwing a bit of a different pitch mix. I think it sets up pretty well for him in this game, because one thing I was looking up was how Detroit has performed against his pitch types, and they are 30th in baseball against sinkers. That is a concern when you face Framber. So, I think it's overall a good matchup for Houston for several reasons. I have some concerns in the series when it comes to the Tigers. I do think they're priced okay in game 1, though. If I had to pick a side in game 1, it would be the Tigers. I have it as flipping coins where it's at right now, but I just am concerned about games 2 and 3 for the Tigers, mainly because of the way they approached the pitching matchups down the stretch. Obviously tough to get through 162 games this way, but final 3 or 4 weeks, they just basically Skubal and then just throwing out bullpen games. It's going to be tough to do that in a back-to-back-to-back setup, though. So especially, man, they're in big trouble if they don't win game 1 for sure, because that probably means they're going to have to use some bullpen arms in this game, right? So if they're not able to just save all their bullpen bullets for games 2 and 3, I'm worried. I'm worried about their lack of lefties in the pen as well to attack what could be Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez. I don't know. That's honestly my biggest concern. I don't feel like Alvarez is going to be ready to go. The report I read just wasn't that optimistic. I mean, hadn't started baseball activities as of a day or two ago, I think, and they were saying they need to see something more from him in order to put him on the postseason roster. I don't think he's going to play, but I don't know, man. I just still think this Tigers team, I know they lit the world on fire final month, but I'm interested in basically betting Houston if they go down 1-0. I think they're going to have a good chance to scoop the last two games because it's such a pitching advantage for them. They have three starters I can trust. I mean, Kikuchi and Hunter Brown are very good as well. So another thing I read, really poor performance from Detroit against hard fastballs. They were one of the, I think, bottom 5 teams. I read that in a Fangraphs article this morning previewing the series. So obviously all these guys throw hard, 95 plus. Kikuchi's maybe the softest of them, or maybe Framber. They're both living like 94, 95 though, so plenty of velocity there. And I just think Houston is just much better, and obviously getting the home series as well. So it seems like a good spot for them.
To tack on to your point about Valdez, especially over the second half, 2.63 xFIP, which is the third best in all of baseball behind Logan Gilbert and Blake Snell. Kikuchi is 7th on that list in terms of xFIP, and then Hunter Brown is 11th. So the series over a 3-game stretch certainly sets up well for the Astros. And then just to go back to your point about maybe it wasn't necessarily your point about variance with the Tigers, but getting lucky down the stretch or getting fortunate to go on this kind of run. Detroit had a 0.2% playoff probability in mid-August. So not only overcoming that, but when I was digging into one-run variance, if you go back to last postseason, last year, the Brewers, Orioles, and Marlins had the best one-run records in all of baseball, and they all lost in the Wildcard round. Detroit has won a league-high 37 games by a single run. You have an elite bullpen, especially in the final month of the season. You have the Cy Young winner, as you noted, and Tarek Skubal, but with variance carrying them, because one-run games are essentially coin flip games, even more so than the market may deem pre-flop. So how far can positive variance carry you in a 3-game stretch where every situation is heightened, and the Astros, even without Alvarez, have a better lineup, a more potent lineup? You mentioned some of the reports being a little more negative going into Tuesday's series opener. He's supposed to take batting practice as we record this sometime Monday afternoon. So that's up in the air, and that's what kind of makes dissecting the Astros-Tigers series odds and Game 1 odds a little bit difficult, even though the pitching matchup is determined. Houston minus 182 to win the series over at Bet365 Sportsbook. Detroit plus 150 to win Game 1. To win Game 1, Houston minus 150, Detroit plus 125. Even if Alvarez doesn't play, I like your Game 2 look for Houston, but it may not even get there if the Astros, who have fared well in the second half against lefties, top 5 weighted on base average and WRC plus in both categories against left-handed pitching, if they're able to get to Skubal, it could easily be a sweep.
Yeah, I've been a Skubal stan since literally the first time I saw him. Just love watching that guy pitch. So very excited to see him in a high leverage spot. And Framber, I've always been a Framber guy too. So these are two of my favorites. I'm always biased to the lefties as a lefty myself. So excited to watch that one. But yeah, it's hard to see these offenses having much success in Game 1, especially with the pitch type matchup favoring Houston and Skubal obviously being probably the best pitcher in the world at this point. So yeah, I'm a little bit tempted to go under 6.5, but that's obviously a tiny total, so it's rough.
At one book, I'm actually seeing 6 even money to the under. So it's a pretty sharp book, just something to keep in mind. But as Mo noted, including at Bet365 Sportsbook, most shops posting 6.5 total with juice toward the under. And as we record this, Francisco Lindor has given the Mets the lead by a run with a 2-run shot in the top of the ninth. So I give Mo credit. I don't think you've broken anything during this recording, so kudos to you.
Only a few shakes of the head. I bet people can just like rewind it and see the exact moment it happened.
Or hear it, depending on how they're consuming the podcast. But hopefully things turn around for you. Hopefully things turn around for the underdogs here. As you know, I'm a big dog backer, whether it's Major League Baseball, NFL, whatever it may be. My numbers tend to side with underdogs. So as we look at the second of the two wildcard series in the American League, Orioles taking on the Royals over at Bet365. Very similar, if not identical prices for game one. Baltimore minus 150 favorite, Kansas City plus 125 on the money line. If you look at the total here, over under 7 with VIG toward the over. So a little bit more juiced, both when you think about VIG and with the total itself being about a half run higher. And then series price wise, Baltimore minus 172, Kansas City plus 145. We mentioned the Yordan Alvarez injury for Houston. Vinny Pasquantino has been out for the last month plus for Kansas City, and his status is unknown for this series as well. The Royals first baseman and a mainstay in Kansas City's lineup, which struggled down the stretch. So anywhere you want to go with this series, most similar to Houston and Detroit, how are you looking to attack it?
I'm not really sure about this one, to be honest. I don't have much of a lean here. I think this one's pretty fairly priced. Maybe a small lean toward the Orioles here, just because I feel like Corbin Burnes is going to be fine. But I'm concerned about their pitching. I have been all season. That's why I faded them in season-long markets. Came down to the last game, so that was quite a sweat. But yeah, I mean, I think that they have a pitching disadvantage slightly in each of the first two games as far as starters go. I'm assuming it's going to be Zach Eflin in game two. I do have Lugo rated just a hair higher than him, so I think Kansas City does have the better arm going in both of those games, but there is a massive difference in these offenses, man. I mean, especially without Pasquantino, like you said, I don't think he's going to be back, and their offense has really tanked final month or so of the season. They really, really struggled to score. I know that the Orioles struggled at times as well, but they are throwing out some pitchers who probably aren't going to play major roles in this series, right? And the game three starters would be interesting to me. It seems like it would be pretty up in the air on both sides. I don't know if we might be looking at a double bullpen game at that point. Guys like Cade Povich, guys like Michael Wacha. Yeah, it's Povich is a Husker, so be careful. But it's a good time for Huskers. Schwellenbach, despite the way the rest of this game went. Banner time to be a Husker in MLB. But yeah, I think this is probably pretty fairly priced, and I think that the Orioles, with Westberg back, that is obviously big for them. Their lineup has struggled a bit down the stretch, so you just don't want to see guys like Emmanuel Rivera taking every day at bats. You know, it's just not a good situation.
Baltimore's lineup, if you look at overall this season, highest ISO across baseball, which is where you mentioned Lugo and Wacha. If it is Wacha in game three or could be a bullpen game, who knows? But both pitch to contact guys, which is my nervousness where that comes into play with potentially backing Kansas City on the series price. But then you look at Reagan's 3.14 ERA, 2.99 FIP. One of the best starters in baseball throughout the course of this entire season. Burns' postseason woes, if those come into play, on top of the fact that he is a 2.95 ERA, 3.55 FIP. So I don't want to say potential regression over a one or series-long, postseason-long sample size, but maybe Reagan's stuff is a little bit more sustainable, at least in game one against Baltimore's lineup. Baltimore a little bit worse against left-handed pitching too, but then if Pasquantino isn't back, you look since August 30th, Kansas City ranks dead last in baseball in every single slash line category, and I broke that down in the AL Wildcard Series preview over at thelines.com. I also wanted to ask you if you have any take on the home road splits for Kansas City, home at Kauffman Stadium, and obviously on the road, 12th best weighted on base average at Kauffman, and then they're tied with Cleveland, another luck box team, for the ninth lowest weighted on base average away from home. So with or without Pasquantino, or maybe even more heightened without Pasquantino, their bats really cool off away from Kauffman. They'll be at Camden Yards for this best of 3 game wildcard series. Any thoughts there on Kansas City on the road?
Not too much in the home road department. I would point out that like they did earn where they got. Base runs has them as deserving of 86 wins. So unlike Cleveland, they are actually a pretty good team. But yeah, concerned about this offense down the stretch. And I think you bring up another good point, actually, when you were talking about how reliant the Orioles are on power. I mean, historically, that's been a plus in the playoffs. So I think a lot of people think of that as a weak point, but in recent history, the stats back up that power is more important in the playoffs, which I think intuitively makes sense. You just think about you're facing the best pitchers in the world. It's hard to get base runners on over and over, and it's best if you can just strike swiftly and with a big stick, right? And score runs in a bunch, and then it's just, especially in this era too, of like, we're just looking at a lot of more top-heavy lineups, right? Because just the way MLB has set up the luxury tax and whatnot, it's so much more punishing than it used to be. So it's harder to have a loaded lineup from top to bottom. So you really are relying on your top of the order guys. And obviously, like the Royals, when they had Pasquantino, they had that because they had 3 really good hitters with Salvi and Bobby Witt. And then you take one of those guys away, I think you can see why they've struggled so much. So I do think the Orioles are rightfully solid favorites, and I'm more than a little bit concerned about this KC offense. I would say one thing people should look for in this series, honestly, maybe some live overs, man. This is 2 very untrustworthy bullpens here.
Royals bullpen has been better in the second half, or at least over the last month. But yeah, it's still unstable. Baltimore, you hit on it earlier. We don't know who their closer is going to be. Could be situational also, just depending on which part of the Royals order is coming up, or pinch hitters potentially mixed in. Also on the note of power, if you look at the Royals lineup outside of Pasquantino, their best power hitters are right-handed, and Camden Yards is best suited for left-handed power just because of the way that ballpark has been reconstructed. Per Park Factors on StatCast, 3rd worst for right-handed power. Doesn't suit the Royals lineup, on top of the fact that they've gone cold over the last month. To my point about Reagan's going up against Burns, would you at least consider Kansas City, maybe not bet, Kansas City first 5, just because I like the way Reagan stacks up against Baltimore's lineup, despite the power deficit for Kansas City's offense potentially over the first 5 innings. And Burns, peripherally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of, and his playoff lack of success could also come into play. So any bets here, or are you completely staying away?
I think completely off this one, but if I were to bet it, I would bet the same side as you. The Royals would be my play. I have them as neutral EV as well at their current price, around plus 120, plus 125. I think that's fair, so that would be the side I would take. I did look up KC splits against cutters. I always look that up anytime Corbin Burns is involved. It was pretty neutral relative to like their season-long numbers, so I don't think there's anything there one way or the other as far as a matchup advantage there. But agree with you that it is an edge for KC with Reagan's on the mound against Burns.
The other thing too, and this is more surface level, and who knows what kind of bettor is listening to the podcast, Mo, but some bettors look at, well, what are Skubal's splits against the Astros, or what are Reagan's splits against the Orioles? Reagan's didn't pitch well against Baltimore in April. Skubal didn't pitch well against the Astros, I believe, in June. But I kind of throw that stuff out the window. It's an extremely small sample size. Maybe home road splits you could factor in, like I touched on with the Royals lineup, variables like that. But I don't necessarily look into how a lineup has performed against a starting pitcher over a 1 or 2 game sample.
Yeah, I'm not inclined to look at that either unless there's something else backing it up, like they're good against a certain handedness or a certain pitch type or vice versa, right? Like maybe if there's something else backing it up, I might be more inclined to believe in it.
Over to World Series futures odds before we get out of here over at Bet365 Sportsbook. Detroit is the biggest long shot on the board. I guess right there with Kansas City, and if Arizona makes it, TBD as we record this here on Monday afternoon. But the Dodgers are the favorites at plus 275 over at Bet365, followed by the Phillies, the Yankees, the Astros, and Orioles. And then you have Cleveland, San Diego, and thereon and so forth. So any World Series futures that stand out to you that you're interested in betting pre-flop here before most of the postseason gets underway?
A couple teams I have my eye on. Just, I think kind of some favorable paths potentially for them. I think the Phillies being this far behind the Dodgers doesn't make that much sense to me. I mean, I know the Dodgers are incredible, but as far as the offense goes, but still major question marks in their pitching staff. Don't even know. I mean, they might be just straight up taking the Arizona Diamondbacks approach from last year, where you just have two starters and then you fire bullpen games. I mean, I don't know. I tried to look up and see if Clayton Kershaw could be back. I haven't seen any indication he's coming back. Tyler Glasnow is out for the year, so not a lot of positive indications for anybody over there, really. And then you just look at Philly, and they just are pretty great from top to bottom, right? I mean, the bullpen has been a little bit shaky at times, but I think it's good on paper. So not a part of the team I'd be too concerned about. So they're interesting to me around plus 500, a little bit shorter than that, but I still think it's maybe worth a look. And then the other team is actually the Astros. They are around plus 900, plus 800, it looks like. They just seem like they do it every year. I know that that's a dumb reason to bet them, and that's not why I'm saying you could consider betting them, but like I said earlier, I like the way this team sets up for the postseason with multiple starting pitchers that I trust, a lineup with a lot of power. The bullpen has been shaky at times as well there, but they still on paper have the arms to do it. I mean, I don't know what the deal is with Presley this year. I haven't dove too far into it. He has been pretty terrible for the most part, but I don't know. They still have Hader and Abreu. I mean, I think they have probably enough to get through. I mean, bullpen is so much variance in the postseason. I mean, we just saw Arizona with just an atrocious unit on paper, and honestly, same for the Rangers last year. And they just both make the World Series with multiple bullpen shutdown games, you know. So you just never know when a bullpen's going to get hot. I would say, like, these teams like the Braves and the Padres, I mean, they're interesting because they have so much talent, especially the Padres top to bottom. The Braves obviously have elite pitching staff, but man, that is just going to be a brutal gauntlet. It looks like it's going to be, San Diego. The Braves would have to beat probably San Diego, LA, and Philly. Like, that just doesn't seem super realistic. And then obviously the other way around is the same for the Padres if the Braves got in. And if the Braves don't get in, it's like then they're facing maybe the Diamondbacks potentially. I can't remember how that one shakes out now that the Braves lost, but I know that the Braves would no matter what play the Padres. So it's a situation where I just think a lot of the talent is on both ends is concentrated in the same sides of the bracket. Like you look at Houston, they might have a favorable path as well. Like you said, Cleveland is maybe the biggest paper tiger there is in the playoffs. So a very fortunate situation for them getting to play Detroit and then Cleveland.
I'm briefly touched on San Diego. I have a big ticket on the Padres from May at 60-1. I'm kind of surprised you don't like them for shorter words here. If you look at the setup, they could potentially will potentially play the Mets or the Braves off of 2 games on Monday. So while it's a difficult matchup on paper, they have that advantage. Plus you get the series at home. You have potentially, I mean, on paper, it's the best bullpen in baseball after getting Adam and Tanner Scott at the trade deadline. Yes, you play the Dodgers if they advance to the division series, but the Dodgers rotation is a big question mark. Flaherty struggling in September. Looks like a 407 xFIP in the final month of the regular season. And Yamamoto and Buehler are also questionable pieces just because of health throughout the course of the season. You have the lowest strikeout rate in baseball when you look at that lineup, and Tatis is back. And then rotation-wise with Cease, Musgrove, Darvish, and who's the last name I'm forgetting?
So their rotation, I wasn't even sure if Musgrove is going to be in there, to be honest. But yeah, I was kind of figuring Darvish was going to be the third piece after Cease. And then I believe so. Their next player was
Michael King.
Michael King, right? So he's been obviously excellent, and I think those are the clear top two. But maybe a little lacking in the left-handedness department, which I think can help you against the Dodgers. But they do, like you said, have some lefty relievers, like Tanner Scott could be a big weapon in that series. I like the Padres a lot from a talent standpoint. I was betting them in that last series against the Dodgers, and they were winning. So I just the path is going to be very tough because they might have to face the two other best teams in baseball. Is that out of line? The AL might just not be as good as the NL. I don't know. It just looks that way this year to me.
Yeah, and San Diego 12-1 to win it all. I'm with you. I'm in the camp that the American League is maybe as an entirety is a paper factor or a paper tiger, as you said with the Cleveland Guardians. Maybe just overall, you don't want to touch American League futures when you look at the World Series futures market, whether it's the Yankees at 4-1, the Astros at plus 850, the Orioles at 9-1, Cleveland at 11-1 is one we both agree on, definitely worth staying away from. But as we wrap up here, Mo, anything else you want to touch on futures-wise or just baseball betting for the postseason before we get out of here?
So I guess one thing that might be worth briefly talking about is the Diamondbacks. We haven't really talked about them as well at all. Maybe this is just going to be a worthless 2 minutes of everyone's life, but if they were to somehow get in, I mean, this team has basically been like the best team in baseball, them or the Padres, for like the last month and a half, 2 months, whatever it is. So this team is intriguing. Obviously, they make a run last year, and then they're just after they got healthy and Corbin Carroll. Like if Corbin Carroll played like that all year, they might have won. They might have won the NL West. I mean, it was that bad. Like he literally went from like MVP candidate to basically a scrub to MVP candidate again. So if he just did that all year, we might be having a completely different conversation about this bracket and these teams. And obviously the pitching getting healthier for them, having a more trustworthy, like Brandon Pfaadt turned in, a good season. So maybe this is just all moot because the Braves won 8-2 against the Mets' long arms or whatever, long relief arms. But have to say that if the Padres get the Diamondbacks get in, they're probably worth looking at a long price.
Yeah, and the difference going back to last year's run to the World Series before losing to Texas in 5 games, negative run differential, and they have the best run differential among wildcard teams, even ahead of San Diego. You mentioned there, for the most part, red hot second half before spiraling down the stretch. I mean, the issue with them is pitching. Like Pfaadt aside, Gallen aside, who maybe you still like him besides his negative peripherals, but the bullpen is still a big question mark. And other rotation arms are also something that I don't necessarily want to back, even though offensively they're as talented as any team in baseball, especially at those odds.
Yeah, and I think the bullpen's obviously better on paper than it was last year, right? You have guys like Justin Martinez emerging and then trading for A.J. Puck, who had one of the most misguided attempts at turning a guy into a starter that I've ever seen, but he is a solid reliever. So back where he belongs in the bullpen. This is like an okay unit on paper. It doesn't look like it should be a massive weak point, but yeah, I haven't looked at any reports as far as like the health of Christian Walker and whatnot. I know he was able to come back. I don't know how things have been going for him because, I was a little bit checked out of the last couple of weeks of the season. It was pretty boring, right? There wasn't really a whole lot of races going on. So I know their offense did struggle a bit down the stretch, but man, they were just absolutely on fire before that when they were healthy.
That's going to do it for Beat the Closing Number. As we break down the American League Wildcard Series and the World Series futures market, you can find the best odds over at Bet365 and sign up for our Bet365 Sportsbook promo over at thelines.com. And remember to also check out all of our written content over at thelines.com. I have that breakdown for the AL Wildcard Series up that's live on the homepage. So for Mo, and for myself, Eli Hershkovich, thanks for watching and listening to another edition of Beat the Closing Number. So long, everybody, and good luck with your MLB postseason bets.